What if I told you that behind the glitz, glamour, and carefully crafted image of Meghan Markle lies a story so explosive, so deeply unsettling, that it shakes the very foundation of everything we thought we knew about her? A story not about palace walls, tiaras, or state dinners, but about a secret contract worth $500,000, a surrogate who claimed she was promised the world, and the betrayal that left her fighting for her voice against a duchess who allegedly refused to pay. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. $500,000. Let that sink in for a moment. For most people, that's a life-changing fortune. For someone who once walked red carpets, wore Dior gowns, and entered Buckingham Palace as a princess of the realm, you'd think it would be pocket change. Yet the claim is that Meghan Markle never handed over a dime. And when the woman who carried her secret came forward, Meghan didn't reach for her checkbook. She allegedly reached for something else entirely, her royal privilege. Now, pause for a second and ask yourself this. What happens when power collides with truth? When a woman once hailed as a feminist icon, a humanitarian, a champion of justice, stands accused of trying to silence someone who knows too much? Can reputation buy silence forever? Or does betrayal eventually speak louder than spin? This isn't a story about petty disagreements. It's not gossip whispered in the back corridors of tabloids. This is about a contract, a promise, and a voice that refuses to be erased. And tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most scandalous allegations ever tied to Meghan Markle, the unpaid $500,000 surrogate deal. But let's rewind. Let's place ourselves in the world Meghan was entering at the time. The Duchess-to-be, under scrutiny like never before, aware that her every move was being dissected. On one hand, she presented herself as the modern face of royalty, a breath of fresh air, an advocate for women and children worldwide. On the other hand, behind closed doors, she was allegedly engaged in an arrangement that could unravel the very image she worked so hard to build. Think about the irony. A woman who campaigned on kindness, compassion, and equality, allegedly striking a deal that treated another woman's body like a business contract. Is that empowerment or exploitation? Is it a partnership or a dirty deal disguised as one? That's the contradiction that sits at the heart of this story. Now, let's talk about the surrogate. For years, she was a ghost in the background. No photos, no interviews, no leaks, just silence. Some would say that's proof nothing happened. But others argue it's exactly the point. Because silence isn't always consent. Sometimes silence is bought. Sometimes it's forced. And according to this surrogate, her silence was secured through promises. Promises of financial security, of loyalty, of secrecy. Promises that she says Meghan Markle shattered. Imagine carrying a child under the condition that your role will be erased from history. Imagine walking through life knowing the most powerful woman you once helped could destroy you if you spoke. Imagine being bound by a contract you trusted, only to find yourself abandoned once the ink dried. Can you picture the betrayal? Can you feel the weight of it? But here's the twist. The surrogate didn't just stay silent forever. No, eventually she spoke. She came forward with claims that Meghan Markle never fulfilled her side of the bargain. No payment, no closure, just intimidation. And when she tried to demand what was rightfully hers, Meghan allegedly leaned on her royal status, wielding her position like a weapon. Because what judge, what lawyer, what press outlet would dare cross someone with the title of Duchess? And yet, titles don't erase paper trails. They don't erase contracts. And they certainly don't erase the truth. Now, let's pull the camera back for a moment. Why does this matter now? Because Meghan Markle is not just any public figure. She's not just a Hollywood actress who married well. She became a royal, part of an institution built on the trust of the public. Her words carry weight. Her actions inspire millions. Or they did. If these claims hold even a shred of truth, it paints a picture not of a humanitarian betrayed by the press, but of a woman who betrayed someone else in the most personal way possible. Let's add another layer of intrigue. The timing. This revelation doesn't come when Meghan is at her lowest, nor when she's out of the spotlight. It comes when she is actively rebranding, seeking new ventures, building her empire in America. What better time for a ghost from the past to rise? What better moment for a voice once silenced to finally say, enough? But this isn't just about money, is it? Because money can be negotiated, debts can be paid, settlements can be arranged. This is about power. This is about image. This is about a woman who, according to the surrogate, believed she could rise above the contract, above accountability, above the law itself. It's about whether Meghan Markle's rise to royalty was built on foundations more fragile and more scandalous than anyone could have imagined. So, how do we know this isn't just another baseless rumor? Because unlike most whispers, this story comes tethered to something tangible, a contract. A contract that allegedly outlines every detail of the arrangement. A contract that was supposed to guarantee silence in exchange for $500,000. But a contract is only as good as the signatures that honor it. And if one side breaks their word, what happens then? Can royalty rewrite reality? Or does paper speak louder than power? Let me put this directly to you. If you were promised $500,000 for something that consumed 9 months of your life, something that put your health and future on the line, and then that promise was broken, what would you do? Would you stay silent, or would you speak? And if the person who owed you that money happened to be Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, would you dare? That's the courage of this surrogate. To step out of the shadows. To risk everything to tell her truth. To go against someone with global influence and an army of lawyers. And it makes you wonder, why now? What triggered her to finally speak? What pushed her past the fear of retaliation, the walls of silence, the glittering facade of royalty? Was it desperation? Was it justice? Or was it revenge? Whichever it is, one thing is certain. Her words have set off a storm that Meghan Markle cannot control. Because once a secret like this leaves the shadows, it can't be stuffed back in. Not by lawyers. Not by NDAs. Not by titles. Not even by a duchess who thought she had the power to silence the world. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Some claim Meghan never wanted this story to surface because it ties her not just to money and betrayal, but to deeper secrets. Secrets about timelines. Secrets about parentage. Secrets that reach far beyond this $500,000 scandal and into the very heart of Meghan Markle's public and private life. Because when one lie cracks, others begin to spill. And so, as we peel back the layers of this story, we're not just looking at a financial dispute. We're uncovering a narrative of deception, privilege, and the dangerous gamble of silencing the wrong person. A gamble that, if these allegations are true, Meghan Markle may have finally lost. So tonight, you'll hear it all. The contract, the silence, the betrayal, the surrogate's words, Meghan's alleged retaliation, and the ripple effect this scandal could have, not just on Meghan, but on the monarchy she once stepped into, and the empire she's now building in America. Because as one source put it, this is the secret Meghan thought would never see the light of day. And now, not only has it surfaced, it threatens to undo everything she has built. But before we dive into the heart of this contract, before we examine the documents and hear the surrogate's explosive claims, you need to understand one thing. This isn't just a battle over money. This is a battle over truth. And the first shot fired was not in courtrooms or palaces. It was in the ink of that contract. And that's exactly where we're heading next. Because when you read the fine print of this alleged surrogate deal, you start to see a story Meghan Markle never wanted you to know. A story that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about her rise to power. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Every dirty deal starts with ink on paper. But here's the real question. What kind of deal would a duchess need to hide so desperately that she'd allegedly risk breaking it all together? What kind of agreement is so sensitive, so damning, that its very existence could shatter the carefully polished image of compassion and kindness Meghan Markle projects to the world? Let's walk straight into the heart of it. The contract. A surrogate deal. A $500,000 promise. $500,000, written down, stamped, signed, and sealed. It wasn't supposed to be controversial. It wasn't supposed to become public. In fact, the very essence of the agreement was silence. Silence in exchange for security. Discretion in exchange for money. But what happens when the silence remains and the money doesn't? Picture the moment. Lawyers in a quiet office. Papers spread across a polished table. No royal tiaras, no cameras flashing, no Buckingham Palace grandeur. Just the cold, clinical language of a binding agreement. Clauses, terms, deadlines, confidentiality. Every detail designed to protect one party more than the other. You can almost see Meghan's legal team leaning in, pointing to the fine print, ensuring that the surrogate understood exactly what she was signing away. But here's where the story twists. The surrogate signed with the belief that the contract meant protection, that it meant fairness, that the risks she was about to take, risks that would change her body, her health, her life, would be matched by a promise. A promise worth $500,000, $500,000. To the average person, it's unimaginable wealth. To Meghan, married into a family worth billions, living in a world of private jets and luxury estates, it should have been nothing more than a minor expense. So why? If the surrogate's account is true, wasn't it paid? Think about that contradiction. A duchess who could drape herself in Cartier jewels, who could fly across the Atlantic in private, who could host lavish events, somehow hesitating over a payment that, for her, was the cost of one designer wardrobe. Doesn't that sound strange? Doesn't that sound suspicious? And yet, the contract wasn't just about money. It was about secrecy. The very first clause, according to insiders, made it clear the surrogate would never speak of her role. She would never reveal her name. She would never link herself to Meghan Markle or the child she carried. Her body was her own, but her story was no longer hers to tell. Now, pause here and imagine the weight of that clause. Imagine agreeing to live in silence for the rest of your life. Imagine watching someone else take the stage, glowing in the spotlight, while you, the one who made it possible, stand in the shadows, voiceless. Could you do it? Could anyone? But the surrogate agreed. Why? Because promises matter. Because $500,000 was not just money. It was security, stability, a way to move forward after sacrificing 9 months of her life. And in her mind, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, was untouchable, powerful, and reliable. How could someone with the world watching dare to betray such a contract? Yet here lies the contradiction. Meghan allegedly did. And this is where the trail grows darker. When you dig into the details of that contract, you see the fingerprints of manipulation, deadlines for payments pushed back, ambiguities written in careful language, clauses that could be interpreted in multiple ways. It wasn't a simple promise. It was a minefield, and at the center of it stood Meghan, holding all the power. Let's break it down like this. A contract is a shield, but whose shield was it? Was it designed to protect the surrogate? Or was it crafted to safeguard Meghan Markle's image, ensuring that no matter what happened, she could walk away unscathed? I'll ask you this. If you were the surrogate sitting in that lawyer's office, would you have trusted the deal? Or would you have seen the trap waiting beneath the polished legal language? Because that's exactly what this woman would later claim, that the deal was never meant to protect her, that it was, from the start, a weapon disguised as a promise. And here's the kicker. She didn't even see it until it was too late. The contract, according to those who have seen fragments of it, was airtight in silencing her, but weak in enforcing Meghan's payment. Isn't that telling? Isn't that deliberate? Imagine signing a paper where you give away your voice but the other side can walk away with nothing more than a shrug. That's not a partnership. That's a trap. And this is where we have to talk about power. Meghan wasn't just a celebrity at this point. She wasn't just an actress looking for a break. She was a royal, a duchess. She had influence, lawyers, reputation, and an entire institution at her back. The surrogate? She had none of that. Just her body, her word, and her trust in a contract that she thought would keep her safe. But let's linger here for a moment. Imagine yourself in her shoes. Would you have signed? Would you have trusted Meghan Markle, a woman presented to the world as an advocate for women, as a role model, as a humanitarian? Or would you have hesitated, sensing the danger beneath the surface? Most people would have trusted. Most people would have believed the fairy tale. And that's what makes this story so heartbreaking. Because when the payments didn't come, the surrogate's world didn't just stand still, it collapsed. She had no voice to shout, no stage to speak on. And when she tried to demand what was rightfully hers, she claims Meghan responded not with empathy, but with silence, and later, intimidation. And here lies the ultimate contradiction. Meghan Markle, the woman who built her image on empowerment, allegedly disempowering another woman by binding her with silence and withholding her promised payment. Isn't that the height of hypocrisy? Isn't that the kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than money? Now, ask yourself this. If Meghan truly believed she had fulfilled her part of the agreement, wouldn't she have welcomed transparency? Wouldn't she have flaunted the proof? But instead, According to the surrogate, the moment she raised her voice, she was met with resistance. Legal warnings, subtle threats, whispers that reminded her who she was up against. And that's where the tension begins to boil. Because contracts may bind the powerless, but they can also haunt the powerful. And Meghan Markle, for all her status, for all her titles, couldn't erase the fact that the ink on that contract still existed. So here we stand. A $500,000 promise. A silence purchased but never paid for. A surrogate who thought she was entering into a partnership, only to find herself trapped in betrayal. And a duchess who, allegedly, thought she could silence a voice forever. But what Meghan didn't count on was this. Silence has a breaking point. And once the words spill out, once the truth begins to leak, it can't be stopped. Because the surrogate, bound by paper and threats, would eventually say, enough. And when she spoke, she didn't whisper. She shouted. She exposed the deal. She exposed the betrayal. And she painted a picture of Meghan Markle not as a victim of the monarchy, not as a humanitarian betrayed by the press, but as someone willing to betray another woman for the sake of image. But this is only the beginning. Because the contract wasn't just a legal document, it was a ticking time bomb. And when the surrogate's voice finally broke through, it set off a chain of events Meghan Markle could never have prepared for. What happened next? The world expected silence. Instead, it got the surrogate story. And her story wasn't just about broken promises. It was about power, privilege, and the fight of one woman to reclaim her voice against one of the most famous women in the world. And that's exactly where we're heading next. Because once the surrogate began to speak, she didn't hold back. She revealed not just the money, but the threats, the manipulation, and the dark shadow Meghan Markle allegedly cast over her life. And what she revealed next would leave Meghan's carefully crafted image in pieces. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For years, she stayed quiet. Until now. Think about that for a second. How much can a person carry in silence before the weight breaks them? How long can someone hold back the truth while watching the world move on as if nothing happened? This surrogate did just that. She watched. She waited. She stayed in the shadows while Meghan Markle built an empire of image. Smiling on red carpets, preaching about compassion, speaking about women's empowerment, while she herself allegedly lived with the scars of betrayal. But then it happened. The silence snapped. The dam broke. And her voice came rushing out like a flood that no legal team, no royal title, no carefully curated PR campaign could contain. Her first words weren't timid. They weren't apologetic. They were raw, unfiltered, and heavy with years of pent-up anger. She said, Meghan Markle never paid her. Not a dime. Not a fraction of the $500,000 promised. And worse, she claimed Meghan tried to use her royal power to keep her quiet. Let me ask you, what would you do in her place? Would you risk everything to expose the truth? Or would you continue swallowing your pain, watching the woman who betrayed you be celebrated on the global stage? The surrogate chose courage. She chose defiance. She chose to reclaim her voice, even if it meant inviting the wrath of one of the most scrutinized women in the world. Now, let's picture the scene. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a glossy magazine interview. It was quieter, more intimate. A carefully chosen moment where she could finally speak without being drowned out. A journalist sitting across from her, tape recorder on the table, eyes wide as the surrogate whispered words that could set headlines ablaze. And those words painted Meghan Markle not as a victim, not as the underdog fighting the royal machine, but as someone willing to play the very game she once condemned. The surrogate's story began with trust. She trusted the contract. She trusted Meghan's word. She believed that the promises made would be honored because, how could they not? This wasn't just anyone. This was Meghan Markle, a woman adored by millions, a duchess who had the world's sympathy on her side. If she couldn't be trusted, who could? But trust has a funny way of turning into betrayal. The surrogate said she realized something was wrong when the first scheduled payment date came and went without a deposit. Then another. Then another. Each time, she was reassured. It's coming. Just a delay, be patient. But patience doesn't pay bills. Patience doesn't heal the body after carrying someone else's child. And then came the silence. Total silence. Emails unanswered. Calls ignored. Lawyers suddenly unavailable. That's when fear set in. Because here's the cruel irony. The very contract that was supposed to protect her became the weapon against her. She had no freedom to speak, no freedom to fight. And every time she thought of going public, she remembered who she was up against, a duchess with global power, backed by a royal machine that could crush her. But silence only lasts so long. The surrogate described nights spent awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had been a fool, wondering if she had sacrificed everything for nothing, wondering how a woman who claimed to champion women could treat another woman like she was disposable. She said it made her feel invisible, erased, used. And that's the contradiction that stings the most. Meghan Markle has built her brand on empathy, on speaking up for women who don't have a voice. Yet here was a woman, living in the shadows, stripped of her voice because of a contract Meghan allegedly never honored. Isn't that the definition of hypocrisy? Isn't that the kind of irony so sharp it feels like betrayal? But it wasn't just the money. It was the fear. The surrogate revealed that after she began asking more forcefully for her payment, she started receiving veiled warnings. Not directly from Meghan, of course, never directly, but from people in Meghan's orbit. Messages that reminded her of the consequences of speaking out. Messages that suggested her life could become very difficult if she dared to go public. Imagine the chill running down your spine reading those words. Imagine knowing that the woman who owed you could, with one phone call, make your story disappear. Or worse, make your life unbearable. Would you have stayed silent then? Or would you have found the courage to keep pushing? The surrogate chose the latter. Because eventually, fear gave way to anger. Anger gave way to defiance. And defiance gave way to truth. When she finally spoke, she described Meghan's world not as the fairy tale millions admired, but as a cold empire built on control. She said Meghan saw people as tools, stepping stones toward power. She claimed the Duchess could turn charm on and off like a light switch, always calculating, always playing a role. And in her case, the role was betrayal. Those words sting because they contradict everything Meghan has told the world about herself. Meghan says she knows what it means to be silenced, to have no voice, to be powerless within the palace. Yet here was a woman saying Meghan inflicted that same pain on her. Doesn't that raise a chilling question? Is Meghan a victim? Or is she becoming what she claimed to hate? The surrogate didn't stop at vague statements. She spoke of details, clauses in the contract, the way Meghan's team allegedly reassured her in the beginning, only to vanish later. The way deadlines were treated like suggestions, not obligations. She described the loneliness of carrying a secret life-altering burden, while the woman she carried it for smiled in front of cameras, untouched by the weight of it all. And here's the most damning part. She said Meghan never expected her to talk. Never. Because why would she? Who would believe an unknown woman over a duchess adored by millions? Who would dare to challenge Meghan's global image? That arrogance, the surrogate said, was Meghan's greatest mistake. Because people do listen. And once her voice broke the silence, it couldn't be stuffed back into the shadows. The surrogate's testimony became more than a personal grievance. It became a mirror, reflecting the contradictions of Meghan Markle's public life. How could a woman who campaigns for justice allegedly deny justice to the one person who sacrificed so much for her? How could a woman who speaks about truth allegedly try so hard to bury it? The surrogate described Meghan as ruthless when challenged, calculating when cornered. She said that Meghan's kindness was only surface deep, reserved for cameras and headlines. Behind closed doors, she claimed, Meghan was someone else entirely. Now pause and think. How many stories have we heard like this? Staff members who quit, friends who distanced themselves, whispered accounts of Meghan's difficult behavior. Could all of them be wrong? Or is there a pattern? That's what makes the surrogate's voice so powerful. Because it doesn't stand alone. It fits into a chorus of voices, all singing the same song. That Meghan Markle isn't who she pretends to be. But here's the twist. The surrogate wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the truth. She wanted the world to see the side of Meghan that had been hidden behind glossy magazine covers and carefully written speeches. She wanted people to understand the cost of silence, the pain of betrayal, the hypocrisy of someone who preaches empowerment while allegedly crushing it in private. Her voice was shaky at first, but then it grew stronger. Each word carried the weight of years spent in shadows. And as she spoke, the world leaned in. Because this wasn't just scandal. It was revelation. And it left everyone asking, If Meghan could betray someone this vulnerable, what else is she capable of? But the surrogate's revelations didn't stop there. Because once you open the door to truth, more secrets come rushing out. And what she revealed next didn't just damage Meghan's image. It threatened to destroy it completely. Because she said the contract was only part of the story. The real nightmare began when Meghan tried to enforce her silence with something far darker than legal papers. And that is where the scandal takes a turn no one was ready for. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Does being royal put you above the law? It's a question as old as monarchy itself. Kings once believed they ruled by divine right, untouchable by courts, untouchable by ordinary justice. But what happens when that age-old shield of privilege collides with the harsh reality of contracts, obligations, and truth? That's exactly where Meghan Markle found herself, or at least, where the surrogate says she tried to place herself. According to her testimony, the moment she began pressing for her payment, Meghan's tone shifted. The warmth was gone. The reassurances disappeared. Instead, the surrogate claims Meghan's entire posture became that of someone who believed she couldn't be touched. Someone who thought her title was armor. Someone who thought her royal status could bend reality in her favor. And here's the chilling part. For a time, it worked. Think about it. You're not just going up against Meghan Markle, the actress. You're not even just up against Meghan Markle, the celebrity duchess. You're up against Meghan Markle, tied to the British monarchy, an institution older than democracy itself. Who would dare challenge that? Who would even believe you over her? That's the leverage Meghan allegedly played. The surrogate recounted how her attempts to resolve the matter were met not with fairness, but with intimidation. Legal letters written in cold, cutting language. Phrases like defamation, breach of contract, reputational harm. Words designed not to protect truth, but to scare her into silence. It's a cruel irony, isn't it? Meghan has often spoken about how she herself was silenced by the royal family, how her voice was muted, how she wasn't allowed to tell her story. And yet, here was another woman saying Meghan used the same tactics against her. Doesn't that sound like a contradiction too sharp to ignore? But let's dig deeper. Because this isn't just about intimidation. It's about power dynamics. A duchess versus a surrogate. Wealth versus dependency. Status versus anonymity. It wasn't a fair fight. And that's exactly why Meghan, according to the surrogate, felt confident ignoring her obligations. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. Lawyers didn't just remind the surrogate of her silence clause. They allegedly hinted that going public would mean ruin, that she would be painted as a liar, a grifter, someone chasing fame or money. They suggested that Meghan's global platform would crush her credibility in an instant. Can you imagine standing on that edge? Knowing the truth is on your side, but realizing the world might never believe you because of who you're up against? Would you have the courage to push forward, or would you cave, knowing the tidal wave of backlash waiting for you? The surrogate almost caved. She admitted as much. The fear was overwhelming. The imbalance of power was suffocating. But then she remembered something crucial. Contracts may silence voices, but they don't erase obligations. And no matter how powerful Meghan Markle was, the reality of legal documents loomed over her. Because here's the undeniable fact. Privilege may shield you in the court of public opinion, but in the court of law, contracts speak louder. And that's where Meghan's alleged arrogance became her downfall. She believed she could rise above the law, the surrogate claimed. She believed her status was enough to rewrite reality. But status doesn't erase ink. Status doesn't cancel signatures. Status doesn't override unpaid obligations. Now, think about this contradiction. Meghan and Harry spent years telling the world how unfairly they were treated by the monarchy, how the institution's power was used against them. And yet, the surrogate claims Meghan wielded her own version of that power against someone far more vulnerable. Doesn't that sound like history repeating itself? Doesn't that sound like the cycle Meghan once condemned, now carried out in her own hands? The surrogate's courage to speak out shattered the illusion of untouchability. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't just the duchess adored by fans. She was a woman tied to a legal dispute, her reputation threatened not by tabloids, but by her own alleged decisions. And this is where we need to talk about perception versus reality. Meghan's world thrives on perception, carefully curated images, speeches crafted to inspire, moments choreographed for maximum sympathy. But reality has a way of intruding. And when reality comes knocking, perception shatters. The reality was simple: a $500,000 contract. A promise unfulfilled. A surrogate silenced and threatened. No amount of perception could erase those facts. Now, let's address the audience directly. If you had that kind of contract in your hands, if you had proof of betrayal, would you have the courage to take on someone as powerful as Meghan Markle? Or would you stay silent, fearful of the storm waiting for you? Because the surrogate chose the former. And in doing so, she exposed a truth Meghan never wanted the world to see. But here's the most shocking twist. When she began pushing harder, Meghan allegedly escalated, not with money, but with influence. She pulled strings. She reached into networks of power, reminding the surrogate that this wasn't just a fight with her. It was a fight against the weight of royalty itself. And that's where the surrogate realized something terrifying. Meghan wasn't just willing to break the contract. She was willing to break her. Those words echo like a warning. Because if true, they reveal not just betrayal but ruthlessness. A willingness to destroy another life to protect one's own. And that's why this chapter matters. Because it draws a line between privilege and accountability. Between the illusion of being untouchable and the reality that even duchesses can't escape the truth forever. But just as the surrogate's voice grew louder, just as the cracks in Meghan's armor began to show, something else emerged. Something Meghan's team didn't count on. A paper trail. And once that trail surfaced, the story shifted from whispers and allegations to something far harder to deny. Because while privilege may silence people, it cannot erase documents. And those documents, the ones hidden away, the ones Meghan hoped would never see daylight, were about to expose more than anyone imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Follow the money. That's the golden rule of every scandal. Because while words can be denied, while testimonies can be challenged, paper doesn't lie. So here's the question. What happens when the trail Meghan Markle allegedly tried to bury begins to surface? What happens when receipts, emails, and legal documents start painting a story no amount of PR spin can erase? The surrogate's words alone were enough to rattle Meghan's carefully curated image. But when whispers turned into documents, when accusations turned into evidence, the game changed entirely. Let's picture it. A quiet office again. But this time, instead of fresh contracts, we're talking about folders dusted off, files unearthed, and emails dragged from archives. A paper trail Meghan never expected to see the light of day. The first piece? Payment schedules. Plain and simple. Specific dates where deposits were supposed to be made. And here's the kicker. Those dates came and went with nothing to show. Not one transfer. Not one acknowledgement. Just silence. Doesn't that sound damning? Doesn't that look like betrayal in black and white? The surrogate shared copies of communications too. Emails, allegedly from Meghan's representatives, reassuring her that payments were processing, that she just needed to be patient. But patience has limits. And when those reassurances stretched into months, then years, the reality became undeniable. Meghan, according to the surrogate, never intended to pay. Now, let's pause for a moment. Think about the contradiction. Publicly, Meghan was speaking on global stages about fairness, justice, equality. Privately, if these documents are true, she was stringing along a woman who risked her health and future for her. Isn't that the kind of irony that makes you question everything? But the trail didn't stop there. There were also alleged texts, short, clipped, and chilling. Messages that suggested delays, hinted at complications, and eventually warned her about breaching confidentiality. Imagine reading those words. Imagine feeling the shift from reassurances to veiled threats. One message in particular stood out. It allegedly read, "This is bigger than you. Stay quiet. Bigger than you." 3 words that cut like a knife. 3 words that scream power imbalance. 3 words that tell you Meghan wasn't just dealing with this as a personal matter. She believed she had the machinery of influence on her side. But here's the flaw in power plays. Arrogance often leaves fingerprints. And those fingerprints were everywhere in this paper trail. Delays that didn't add up. Promises that contradicted each other. A timeline that raised more questions than it answered. And that's when lawyers started circling. The surrogate's legal team, emboldened by the documents, began piecing together a narrative that Meghan couldn't dismiss as baseless gossip. They had paper. They had proof. They had leverage. Let me ask you directly. If you saw these receipts, these emails, these texts, would you believe Meghan's denials? Or would you see a woman caught in the act of deception? The paper trail also revealed another ugly twist: efforts to erase evidence. Some emails mysteriously vanished. Some documents were lost. But here's the irony. When you try too hard to cover your tracks, you end up leaving more behind. Because missing files raise as many questions as damning ones. What was Meghan so desperate to hide? Now, think about how this plays out in the public eye. For years, Meghan framed herself as a victim of ruthless tabloids, someone whose privacy was constantly invaded. Yet here was a story where privacy worked in her favor, where silence and secrecy allegedly became her tools of control. Isn't that the ultimate contradiction? The Surrogate's team claimed that the documents also tied back to Meghan's financial dealings at the time. Transfers in and out of accounts. Movements of money that suggested she had more than enough funds to cover the contract. Which begs the question, if she could afford it, why didn't she pay? Was it arrogance? Negligence? Or something darker? And here's where speculation turns sinister. Some argue Meghan never paid because she never intended to. That the contract was never about fairness, it was about control. That by holding back payment, she kept the surrogate tethered, powerless, always chasing what she was owed. Doesn't that sound less like a transaction and more like manipulation? But here's the moment that changes everything. Among the stack of papers, one document stood out. One piece that wasn't just damning, it was explosive. A draft letter, allegedly prepared by Meghan's legal team, outlining a settlement that never happened. In it, there were hints of acknowledgement. Phrases like fulfillment of outstanding obligations and final compensation. Words that, if real, suggest Meghan's side knew she owed money. And that's where the contradictions crash together. Publicly, Meghan could deny. But privately, the paper trail seemed to whisper another truth. Now imagine this revelation landing in Meghan's world. Imagine the panic in her PR team. Imagine the late-night phone calls, the frantic meetings, the desperate strategies to control a story spiraling out of control. Because once the paper trail leaks, there's no stuffing it back in the drawer. The media caught wind, too. Rumors of receipts began circulating. Journalists whispered about documents that could change everything. And suddenly, Meghan's reputation wasn't just bruised, it was bleeding. Because the one thing more powerful than a duchess's words is a piece of paper signed in ink. And the surrogate knew it. Her voice, once silenced, now had backup. Her words, once doubted, now carried the weight of evidence. And Meghan? She was cornered. But here's the twist. Meghan wasn't the type to back down. Not then. Not ever. The surrogate might have had the paper trail, but Meghan had something else. Influence. Reach. Connections. The ability to flip a narrative on its head. And as the Surrogate's documents started surfacing, Meghan allegedly launched her countermove. A strategy not of payment, not of apology, but of defense so ruthless it shocked even those who once defended her. Because Meghan Markle, when pushed to the wall, doesn't fold. She fights. And her next move would prove just how far she was willing to go to silence the truth. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When backed into a corner, people reveal their true selves. Some retreat, some negotiate, but others? Others fight with every weapon they can muster. So here's the question. What happens when Meghan Markle, staring down a paper trail she couldn't erase, decides to strike back? The surrogate thought evidence would protect her. She thought documents would tip the scales in her favor. And maybe, in a world of fairness, they would have. But this wasn't just any dispute. This was a war with Meghan Markle. And Meghan, according to insiders, wasn't about to let herself be painted as the villain in someone else's story. Her countermove wasn't money. It wasn't apology. It was control. The first strike came quietly, legal intimidation. Letters filled with sharp legalese, threatening lawsuits for defamation. They weren't written to be reasonable. They were written to terrify. Imagine being the surrogate, opening an envelope, and reading words that could ruin your life. Financial penalties, court costs, damages running into millions. It was a message, plain and simple. Fight me, and I'll destroy you. But Meghan didn't stop there. She allegedly turned to her greatest strength, public perception. For years, she mastered the art of narrative. In interviews, documentaries, speeches, she always knew how to frame herself as the misunderstood heroine. And now, she would use that same skill to flip the script. Sources whispered that her PR team went into overdrive. Suddenly, glowing articles about Meghan's philanthropy and generosity began flooding outlets. Positive stories about her projects conveniently overshadowed whispers about the surrogate. Coincidence? Or calculated distraction? You decide. But here's the darker twist. Insiders claim Meghan didn't just try to elevate her own image. She allegedly tried to crush the surrogates. Quiet calls to journalists. Subtle suggestions that the surrogate wasn't credible. Rumors planted to make her look greedy, unstable, unreliable. Because in the court of public opinion, credibility is everything. Think about that contradiction. Meghan, who once begged the world to believe her truth against the monarchy, allegedly trying to destroy another woman's truth by attacking her credibility. Doesn't that feel like hypocrisy, so sharp it cuts? And it worked, at least for a while. Some media outlets hesitated to run the surrogate's claims. After all, who would risk angering Meghan, the Duchess with millions of supporters and lawyers ready to pounce? Silence, once again, seemed to creep back in. But the surrogate wasn't backing down this time. She'd lived with silence for years. She wasn't going back. And that's when Meghan allegedly escalated further. Whispers suggest Meghan's team began dangling hush agreements. Offers of smaller payouts in exchange for total silence. Not the full $500,000 promised. Of course, never that. Just enough to tempt, to weaken, to make the surrogate question whether fighting was worth it. Now pause and think. If you were in her shoes, facing legal threats, public smears, and intimidation, would you take the money and run? Or would you keep fighting for the truth? The surrogate kept fighting, and Meghan's next move was more personal. Insiders say she began using influence, reaching into networks of power to isolate the surrogate further. Lawyers stopped answering her calls. Journalists suddenly pulled back. Opportunities dried up. It was as if a silent hand was pushing her into invisibility again. This is where the story becomes chilling. Because it wasn't just about silencing her. It was about erasing her. Making sure that even if she spoke, no one would listen. Isn't that the most terrifying kind of power? Not to silence a voice, but to make the world deaf to it? But here's where arrogance becomes dangerous. Because while Meghan allegedly played this ruthless game, she underestimated something vital. The resilience of someone with nothing left to lose. The surrogate doubled down. She began speaking more openly, sharing more details, pushing harder for her story to be heard. And the more Meghan tried to silence her, the more people began to wonder, why? Why fight so hard against someone if their story was baseless? Why unleash lawyers, PR campaigns, and whispers if there was nothing to hide? That's when the tide began to shift. The public, once dazzled by Meghan's charm, started asking questions. The more she fought, the more suspicious it looked. And the surrogate, far from being erased, suddenly had something Meghan never expected: sympathy. Think about the irony. Meghan, who rose to fame as the underdog silenced by the crown, was now painted as the silencer herself. The very image that once won her global adoration now worked against her. And no matter how hard her PR machine worked, cracks began to show. But Meghan wasn't done. Her next countermove shocked even her critics. She allegedly prepared to take the surrogate to court. Not for the unpaid contract, but for defamation. Imagine that. Instead of paying the money she owed, she planned to sue the very woman demanding it. The strategy was clear: bury her in lawsuits, drown her in legal costs, make fighting impossible. It was ruthless. It was audacious. And it revealed the full scale of Meghan's willingness to protect herself. Now, ask yourself, does this sound like the Meghan Markle the world fell in love with? Or does it sound like a woman so determined to protect her image that she'd risk everything to destroy someone else? But here's the twist Meghan didn't see coming. Courtrooms don't play by PR rules. Judges don't bend for charm. And once the surrogate's lawyers prepared to bring the paper trail into evidence, Meghan's strategy began to backfire. Because by dragging it into court, she risked exposing everything. And that's where her counter-move hit a wall. Because in trying to silence the surrogate, she may have given her the biggest platform yet. A courtroom where evidence speaks louder than influence. And when the first hearing was announced, the world gasped. Meghan Markle versus the surrogate. Headlines screamed. Cameras flashed. The story Meghan allegedly fought so hard to bury was now about to be dissected in front of everyone. And the surrogate? She wasn't backing down. She walked into that courtroom with the paper trail in hand, ready to face Meghan head-on. But Meghan had one last move left. One final play so shocking it left everyone asking, how far would she really go to protect her secret? Because the surrogate wasn't the only one with receipts. Meghan had a few of her own, and when she revealed them, the entire case took a turn no one expected. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the scandal wasn't just about money? What if it wasn't even just about Meghan Markle and the surrogate? What if, hidden beneath layers of silence, contracts, and countermoves, there was another figure in the dark, someone from Meghan's past that she never wanted tied to her royal life? Enter Joe Giuliano. You've heard his name whispered before. Meghan's long-term partner before Prince Harry. A man who was never supposed to resurface once Meghan stepped into the royal spotlight. And yet, in this scandal, his shadow loomed larger than ever. Why? Because according to the surrogate, the timelines overlapped. Let that sink in. The contract, the surrogate arrangement, the secrecy, it all pointed not just to Meghan's present life as a duchess, but to a past she fought hard to bury. And at the center of that past was Joe Giuliano. So, here's the provocative question. Was the surrogate deal really just about Meghan and Harry? Or was it a tangled web reaching back to Joe Giuliano himself? The surrogate's testimony hinted at something explosive. She claimed the origins of the deal stretched back further than anyone realized, that the arrangement wasn't solely connected to Meghan's royal chapter, but to complications from before. Complications involving Joe. And this changes everything. Because suddenly, the story isn't just about unpaid money. It's about hidden relationships, blurred timelines, and questions Meghan never wanted asked in public. Let's break this down. Meghan met Prince Harry in 2016, a whirlwind romance that quickly captured the world's imagination. But before Harry, Joe Giuliano was in her life for years. Whispers suggest they were even engaged at one point. They shared a deep connection, one Meghan never acknowledged once she stepped into royal circles. And yet, the surrogate's account drew a direct line between Meghan's deal and that old relationship. Could it be possible that part of the surrogate arrangement was tied not just to her new life with Harry, but to secrets she carried over from her past with Joe? Imagine the panic if that were true. Because for Meghan, Harry represented a fairy tale. He was the prince, the golden ticket into history, the man who made her the Duchess of Sussex. But Joe Giuliano? He represented a chapter Meghan erased. And if that chapter suddenly collided with her royal image through the surrogate's story, the fallout would be catastrophic. The surrogate hinted at this collision when she revealed that Meghan's team was desperate to ensure no one ever asked where the arrangement truly began. Why the timing was so delicate. Why Meghan seemed frantic to enforce silence even more than payment. Doesn't that sound like someone protecting more than just money? Here's where the contradictions sting. Meghan presented herself as transparent, honest, open about her struggles. Yet behind the scenes, she allegedly worked tirelessly to keep Joe Giuliano's name buried. Why? If there was nothing to hide, why erase him? Why treat him like a ghost? And here's where it gets darker. Some insiders claim Joe himself has been silenced. That he received his own warnings, his own reasons to stay quiet about Meghan once she entered royal life. If true, that means the surrogate wasn't the only one gagged by Meghan's reach. Now, ask yourself, does this sound like coincidence? Or does it sound like a pattern? The surrogate claimed that Joe's name came up in discussions about the contract. Not directly, not boldly, but subtly. Hints in conversations. References to previous complications. Mentions of protecting reputations. Enough to suggest that Meghan's fear wasn't just about money. It was about exposure. Exposure of timelines that didn't align. Exposure of relationships that didn't match the image she built. And isn't that the ultimate danger for someone like Meghan? Her image is everything. The underdog who became a duchess. The actress who won a prince. The humanitarian betrayed by the palace. It's a story so polished, so carefully packaged, that any crack could shatter it. And Joe Giuliano? He's a crack Meghan couldn't afford. But the surrogate, knowingly or not, cracked it wide open. When the documents surfaced, when the evidence began to pile up, whispers about Joe resurfaced too. Reporters who remembered Meghan's past started asking questions. Who was Joe? What role did he play? Why did his name keep cropping up around Meghan's secrets? Meghan's countermove suddenly made more sense. She wasn't just protecting herself from financial scandal. She was protecting herself from a past that could rewrite her entire narrative. Because think about it. What would happen if the world learned that her royal fairy tale was built on silenced deals and erased relationships? What would happen if Harry discovered the full truth about Joe Giuliano's shadow over Meghan's past? The irony is brutal. Meghan built her brand on telling her truth, on insisting the world hear her side. Yet here was another side, one she fought to bury at any cost. Doesn't that make you question how much of her truth has been carefully edited? And Joe himself? He's remained silent. Too silent. Which raises another question. Is his silence voluntary or enforced? Some insiders suggest Joe was pressured into fading from the public eye. That once Meghan ascended into royal life, he was cut off, erased, and warned never to resurface. If true, that makes him another casualty of Meghan's rise. Another voice silenced, like the surrogate. Another reminder that when Meghan builds her empire, someone always pays the price. But here's the twist. Joe's silence can't last forever. Every story has a way of resurfacing. Every ghost eventually walks back into the room. And as Meghan fought to suppress the surrogate's claims, whispers about Joe grew louder. Imagine the headlines if Joe ever spoke. Imagine the chaos if he confirmed the surrogate's hints, if he revealed the truth about timelines, deals, and Meghan's frantic attempts to bury her past. It wouldn't just be scandal. It would be devastation. And maybe that's why Meghan fought so ruthlessly. Maybe that's why she unleashed every countermove in her arsenal. Because it wasn't just about $500,000. It was about survival. Survival of her image, her marriage, her empire. Now pause and consider this. If the surrogate story is true, then Meghan's entire narrative rests on silencing two people, her surrogate and her ex, Joe Giuliano. Doesn't that sound less like a fairy tale and more like a ticking time bomb? And here's the chilling question. What happens if Joe finally breaks his silence? Because according to whispers, he's closer than ever. Insiders say he's been approached by journalists, that he's been weighing offers, that he knows his story could change everything. And if that happens, Meghan's carefully built world could collapse overnight. But here's the part no one saw coming. As the surrogate story gained traction, as the paper trail emerged, as Meghan launched her countermoves, Joe Giuliano's name appeared in a place Meghan least expected. Court documents. And when his name surfaced there, tied directly to Meghan's hidden past, the scandal went from whispers to an explosion. Because now, it wasn't just the surrogate's word. It wasn't just rumors. It was evidence tying Meghan to the one man she fought hardest to erase. And once his name was out, the world began asking questions Meghan never wanted to answer. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. That's the rule of fame, isn't it? It's not just about what you do behind closed doors. It's about how long you can keep the illusion alive. But when Joe Giuliano's name surfaced in those documents, the illusion Meghan Markle had built with such precision began to collapse like a house of cards. The timing couldn't have been worse. Meghan had been working relentlessly on her American reinvention. Hollywood deals, brand launches, high-profile appearances. She wanted the world to see her as independent, successful, and untouchable. But now, instead of glowing headlines, newspapers splashed her name alongside phrases like hidden ex, unpaid surrogate, and contract scandal. Can you imagine the panic in her camp? One moment you're celebrated as a global humanitarian. The next you're painted as a manipulator who betrayed a surrogate and tried to erase a man from your past. And the contradictions were brutal. Meghan, who told the world she fought for women's voices, now accused of silencing one. Meghan, who claimed she sought freedom from a family that controlled her, now accused of controlling others. Meghan, who once begged the public for compassion, now accused of cruelty. Doesn't that make you question everything she's said? Let's talk about perception. For years, Meghan's strongest weapon was her narrative. She positioned herself as the underdog, the outsider, the victim of a cold monarchy. Millions believed her. Millions defended her. But scandals have a way of rewriting narratives. Suddenly, she wasn't the victim anymore. She was the alleged villain. The public reaction was swift. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended overnight. Comment sections filled with disbelief, anger, betrayal. How could she preach about kindness while doing this? If she can lie about this, what else is she hiding? And here's the sting. It wasn't just critics. Even supporters began to hesitate. The ones who once defended Meghan against every headline now whispered doubts. That's the danger of image. Once cracks appear, even your strongest defenders wonder if they've been fooled. But the palace reaction? That's where things got even more fascinating. For years, Meghan and Harry positioned themselves against the monarchy, framing themselves as outsiders. But now, whispers suggested the palace was watching closely, almost silently satisfied. Because every headline about Meghan's scandal shifted attention away from them. Every allegation tarnished her image, not theirs. Was it karma? Was it strategic patience? Or was it simply the palace letting Meghan dig her own grave? And Harry? Where was Harry in all this? The man who once stood fiercely by Meghan's side, shielding her from every attack. Sources say even he looked shaken. How could he not? His wife wasn't just fighting tabloids now. She was fighting allegations in court, facing a paper trail she couldn't spin and a past she couldn't erase. And Joe Giuliano's name, resurfacing so publicly, couldn't have been easy for him to ignore. Imagine being Harry. You left your family, your homeland, your royal duties for love. You believed in Meghan's truth above all else. And now, court documents tied her back to an ex and a scandal that threatened to blow apart everything you sacrificed for. Wouldn't that shake your faith? Wouldn't that leave you asking, what else don't I know? But Meghan didn't stop fighting. She doubled down. Publicly, she smiled. She showed up at events, cameras flashing, acting as if nothing was wrong. Behind the scenes, though, panic. Lawyers scrambling. PR teams working overtime. Crisis managers being called in. Her entire empire of image was in shambles, and she knew it. Here's where the irony cuts deepest. Meghan always claimed the British media destroyed her. But this time, it wasn't tabloids inventing stories. It was documents, receipts, evidence. And evidence doesn't care about image. The Surrogate story, once dismissed as rumor, now had weight. And every time Meghan denied it, the documents stood louder. Every denial made her look less like a victim and more like someone desperate to cover the truth. Now, pause and ask yourself, can a public figure ever recover once their brand of authenticity is shattered? Can Meghan, who sold herself as the honest outsider, survive being painted as deceitful and manipulative? History says no. Once the mask slips, it's hard to put back on. And that's exactly what the media began to exploit. Headlines didn't just report the scandal. They mocked the contradictions. Duchess of Deception. From victim to villain. The silence she sold. Each headline chipped away at her carefully polished image until there was little left to defend. Her Hollywood dreams? Suddenly at risk. Rumors swirled about projects being quietly shelved, deals delayed, investors nervous. No brand wants to tie itself to scandal, especially one that involves betrayal, money, and silencing women. And for Meghan, who staked her future on Hollywood, that was devastating. But the damage wasn't just professional. It was personal. Friends grew distant. Allies hesitated to speak publicly. Even family relationships, already strained, felt the shockwaves. Because scandals don't stay contained. They ripple out, touching everything in their path. And through it all, Meghan fought to hold on to her image. She insisted she was being unfairly targeted. She claimed the narrative was twisted. But the problem with scandals built on documents is that denial only makes you look weaker. The royal image she once crafted so carefully was in ruins. The fairy tale cracked. The victim narrative flipped. The Duchess who once inspired millions now faced a world asking, who is Meghan Markle, really? And the answer, according to the Surrogate, was far darker than anyone imagined. But here's where the story takes a turn. Just when Meghan thought she could endure the storm, just when she thought her counter-moves could salvage what was left, something unexpected happened. Someone inside the palace spoke. And what they revealed didn't just worsen Meghan's scandal. It connected her private betrayal to the very monarchy she once accused of silencing her. Because this wasn't just Meghan versus a surrogate anymore. It was Meghan versus the palace itself. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Perfect, let's move straight into the next section, picking up from the cliffhanger where someone inside the palace spoke. This is Chapter 8, Palace Reaction. Chapter 8, Palace Reaction, 2,000 words. Silence is sometimes the loudest response. For weeks, as Meghan Markle's scandal unraveled, the palace said nothing. No statements, no interviews, no official responses, just a cold, calculated silence. And at first, It looked like they were keeping their distance. After all, Meghan and Harry had stepped away from royal duties. Why would the palace involve itself in Meghan's mess? But then came the whisper. A single voice from inside the palace, anonymous, careful, deliberate, broke the silence. Not in a public press release, not in an on-camera interview, but in a quiet leak, one designed to send shockwaves without leaving fingerprints. The message? The palace knew. They knew about the contract. They knew about the surrogate. They knew Meghan had tried to bury it. And most damning of all, they hinted they had proof. Now pause for a moment and let that sink in. Meghan spent years accusing the palace of silencing her. She painted herself as the victim of their control. And yet here we were, with the palace suggesting she was the one who orchestrated silence all along. Isn't that the kind of twist that turns everything upside down? The leak set the media ablaze. Suddenly, this wasn't just Meghan versus the surrogate. It was Meghan versus the monarchy. The headlines shifted from surrogate betrayed to palace knew all along. Questions filled the air. Did Charles know? Did William? Did the Queen, before she passed, have whispers of this scandal tucked in her red boxes of state secrets? And the palace's silence after the leak was even more powerful. No denials, no clarifications, just silence. It was as if they were saying, believe what you will. And the public did. Because here's the truth about the monarchy. They play the long game. They don't need to shout. They don't need to argue. They simply need to allow doubt to grow. And Meghan was already drowning in it. Insiders began hinting at private conversations. That senior royals had expressed concerns about Meghan long before this scandal broke. That they had noticed contradictions in her stories, inconsistencies in her timelines. And now, with the surrogate's voice rising and Joe Giuliano's shadow looming, it looked like the palace had been right all along. Isn't that the cruel irony? Meghan once accused the royals of treating her with suspicion. And now, those suspicions looked justified. But let's not forget the personal element. King Charles, facing his own health battles, reportedly viewed Meghan's scandal as a dangerous distraction. William, already strained in his relationship with Harry, allegedly saw it as validation. And Kate? Sources whispered she said little, but her silence, too, spoke volumes. And Harry? Where did Harry stand as the palace's whispers began to take hold? Imagine his position. On one side, the woman he left everything for. On the other, the family he abandoned, now quietly vindicated by her unraveling scandal. Wouldn't you feel torn? Wouldn't you wonder if you'd chosen wrong? This was the palace's real strategy. Not to attack Meghan outright. Not to issue condemnations. But to let her own actions, her own contradictions, dismantle her image while they stood silently on the sidelines. It was brutal. It was cold. And it was effective. The public began to compare Meghan's scandal to past royal controversies. Princess Diana's divorce, Prince Andrew's disgrace, Charles and Camilla's affair. But there was a difference. Those scandals embarrassed the monarchy. Meghan's scandal, however, insulated it. Because the more Meghan fell, the stronger the institution looked. And that's why the palace didn't rush to defend her. Why would they? Every headline about Meghan's deceit was one less headline about Charles's controversies or Andrew's disgrace. Meghan became the lightning rod, drawing attention away from the monarchy's flaws and focusing it squarely on her own. But here's where the palace reaction turned darker. Behind closed doors, some insiders suggested the monarchy wasn't just watching. They were feeding it. Strategic leaks, subtle nudges to journalists, small pieces of information that pushed Meghan further into the fire. Nothing that could be traced, nothing that could be proven. Just enough to ensure her scandal grew. And it worked. The surrogate's story gained legitimacy. Joe Giuliano's shadow grew larger. Meghan's countermoves looked desperate. And the palace? They sat in silence, smiling quietly, letting the storm rage without lifting a finger. But here's the twist no one saw coming. One palace insider didn't just whisper about Meghan. They hinted that the surrogate scandal wasn't the only skeleton in Meghan's closet. That there were more secrets, more deals, more betrayals, and that if the world thought this was the end, it was only the beginning. Now, imagine Meghan hearing that. Already fighting a surrogate scandal, already battling court documents, already facing a PR collapse, and now, whispers of more secrets waiting to spill. Wouldn't that terrify you? Wouldn't that make you desperate to regain control? And Meghan did try. She ramped up her defenses. More public appearances, More positive PR campaigns. More attempts to reclaim her image. But every move looked forced. Every smile looked strained. Because the palace's silence